Welcome to Manifest Marriages. Andrew and Bethany Hill together.
Yes,
I think you can figure out which one is which.
maybe.
I'm Andrew.
I'm Bethany.
And so I'll go first. My question to you, Bethany, is unity is a hard thing. It's harder than people think, just in life, business, friendship, to have unity, to maintain unity, to agree. And in our marriage, what are some things that have helped us to remain united? Because we've definitely had times where we were not. So what helps us to stay united? Not just to stay married, I'm talking about to stay harmonious in unity and agreement.
I know for a fact that most of our harmony and unity comes when we're both in that secret place with the Lord, where we're having our time with the Lord and putting Him first. I think when it becomes the most disharmonious or disunited and disjointed has been a time where we've slacked in that area, where we're not as focused on the Lord, not spending our own personal time and growth in the Lord. And that's when it gets really out of whack. So I would say that focusing on your own personal relationship with the Lord, staying in the Word, praying for each other, and also spending time, discussing the Lord with each other, like what's He talking to you about, what's He showing you about.
Yeah.
I think that has been probably the most beneficial for unity. But I know for other just practical things, like with the kids, it's been discussing it beforehand, like, hey, if we don't want to be played against each other, so if one of the kids comes to you and asks you something, double check with me before you just give an answer. Like those kind of practical, like communication, just staying, communicating with each other. And then, we have a lot of shared interests, so that helps a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are, I think, some of the big things for us. And just praying for your spouse too, just keeping them covered, understanding your roles. Like if I'm not trying to be the head of the house, that helps a lot. If
Yeah.
I'm staying in my place, and I say my place, my role, like, oh, you better, no, not like that. But you have to know your rhythm and staying in that place and staying in the way that God designed marriage helps keep it in unity. Like you're the head, to respect you as the head, to treat you in the honor. That helps a lot. So there's my answer. What do you think?
If I had one thing, all of that is not only really good, but it's a lot. We're in agreement on that. I agree with everything you said, and I think it's the most important things. And even those things in our soul, our preferences and things, we do have a lot in common. And I think that this happen. It can happen when God puts two people together, when it's His choice. They also can have a lot of differences, but they complement each other. They fit.
Yeah.
So some people are a lot alike in soulish areas, and then some of them, when it's of the Lord, it still fits. It's like puzzle pieces. But
Yes.
the one thing I was going to say is that knowing right from wrong, being in agreement about what's right and what's wrong.
There's shared values.
Shared values.
You have the shared values.
Yeah,
Definitely.
And I think just and from a biblical standpoint, if you're two Christians together and you say, hey, we agree that what the Bible says is wrong, we say is wrong, or what the Bible says is right, we agree with that. We say that's right. And that helps with so much, because when an issue comes up, you know what your spouse is thinking, because that's definitely wrong. We're not going to do that. Yeah. And sometimes there's gray area, not in right and wrong, but in how to execute that or what that looks like. And that's where you're just individuals, and you can have your own opinions about things that are not so concrete, because the Lord gives quite a bit of freedom, and the Bible gives a lot of freedom, but there's some absolutes that are just like, especially when you're raising children, you have to agree on, what's right and wrong. And but the Bible doesn't talk about, whether or not they should watch Bugs Bunny or SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah.
So, and that's something we have to come to a consensus on. And I know we can be different on that. You and I have been, you'd be like, I definitely don't want them to do this for A, B, and C. And I say, oh, it's not that bad or whatever. And have to come into the middle and say, no, these are the reasons why.
Yeah.
they shouldn't watch this, or they can watch some of this, but not the whole thing, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's where the communication piece really comes in, is to make sure you communicate and you understand each other and you come up with an agreement when you're not on the same page, or like if it's those things where it's, is this permissible, or what's permissible, because what might be right for you might not be right for another family or whatnot. But just to come up with those family values, those family core values. Like in our house, I can't stand it when the kids say shut up. Like,
Yeah.
people might be like, what's bad about that? But at the same time, like, I just see it as a sign of disrespect to each other, and I don't want them to do it.
Right.
Like, so that's one of those areas where communication is key, because one spouse might be like, that's not that bad, but
Right.
to understand where your spouse is coming from and why it's important to them, and make it a family value. And so I think that's important. And you kind of segued into what I was going to ask you.
Oh, okay.
Because we have mentioned this the last two videos. So I wanted us to just talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, what is this term, equally yoked? Where does it come from? And what does it mean pertaining to marriage?
Well, so your question to me is just defining that, like what that.
Yeah, define it, and like even talk about where we get it from. Like, why is it important? Because it's kind of an old-fashioned term, like people like equally yoked. What does that mean? So, like eggs? No, not eggs.
Well, it comes from, Paul was teaching the Corinthian church. He had written to them. There's 2 letters he wrote to them. And one of those letters he talked about, do not be unequally yoked. And the imagery really is of 2 oxen that are yoked. You'd have a wooden piece that yokes them together so that they could plow the field together. And an ox is a very big, strong animal, very powerful. But you need, sometimes you need 2 of them to, get done what you need to get done, I guess, for sowing and harvest time, and or even irrigation. I'm not sure what they all use it for in the Jewish community, but so he was alluding to that and teaching this, and he was saying in marriage, if you have one oxen that's sickly, or one that's way smaller than the other, or any of those kind of things, it can be difficult because the stronger ox is pulling that one all the time. And it may affect the aisle, like maybe it's cut uneven, or they don't create a straight cut like where they're supposed to prepare the ground for sowing, or and they're not as productive. So you equate that with marriage. It's you don't want to marry someone who's not spiritually in the same place you are. And there's typically going to be someone who's a little bit closer to the Lord, or more spiritual, or whatever that looks like. But they have to be in the same place you are. So, for instance, if one person is a cessationist and another person is, they believe in a continuation of the gifts of the Spirit, that's an unequally, they're in 2 different places.
Yeah.
One person is saying the Spirit still manifests gifts, these 9 gifts through people, and the other says he's done with that. He doesn't do that anymore. That's the New Testament, and that died with the apostles. That's an instance of being unequally yoked. But there's certain places you can have smaller differences in, like whether our children should be fully baptized, like submerged, or whether they sprinkle with water. I would say that's something that's not quite as big of a thing. But I see a lot of Christians, they are filled with the Spirit. They marry someone who just barely believes. Like they're going to be saved because they believe in Jesus, but they have no fruit.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous place to be, and it's a very frustrating place. And you'll have years of heartache when you do that. And I've seen that happen. I've seen a lot of believers just marry someone because they were physically attracted to them, or it was convenient, or they had a lot of money, or they say, oh, well, they're a Christian,
Or they just got tired of waiting.
Yeah, waiting is a big one, because there are a lot of believers, you have to wait, and the Lord is working things out in this. And you say, why is it taking so long, Lord? And we don't always know the answer to that. But
well, sometimes the answer is we put our expectations on a relationship instead of letting the Lord do. Like, I know a lot of people who, they were like, oh, but I think once we get married, they'll change, they'll get stronger, because our love and whatever, instead of waiting for that to produce itself before the marriage.
Right.
Like, you know, and I've seen instances where, like, especially for us ladies, I'm just going to be honest, where I know I had a friend who was talking about his parents' relationship. And, you know, the dad was unsaved and the mom was saved. And she was like, I'm not going to be in a relationship with you because, you know, my relationship with the Lord is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and he still pursued her because he liked her. And she was adamant, you know, like, I'm not going to marry someone who's not a Christian. And he ended up not only becoming a Christian, but ended up, you know, becoming such a strong Christian before they got married that once they got married, he even became a pastor, and that was their life together. And I mean, it was a matter of a few months, but she was absolutely like, no, and she could see the fruit of the change. Like, it wasn't just lip service either. Like, he did radically change within a few months once he became a Christian, and he started coming to church just because of her. Now, that's one of the great stories, you know, but there are people who, you know, they say one thing, but their fruit is saying something different. And people are looking at what they're saying and not what they're seeing. And they're like, well, he says this. And he said, well, if you don't see it, then don't marry him,
right.
You know, like, or her, you know. And guys, unfortunately, a lot of times get led by their wives spiritually, sometimes more than they lead. They just take that back seat. And, you know, like, that can lead into the unequal. But when I hear the yoke thing too, I think about the strength, like that part of like keeping your relationship with the Lord strong, you know, first and foremost. And if you do that, if you're both doing that, like, you both have to do that. When we were talking about unity, like, when we've had the most discord has been when we're not both doing that. Like, someone's slacking in that area, and you can really tell it's really quickly.
Yeah, even if it's just for that day, you can definitely tell you're off and you're not in sync, you know. And I mean, go ahead.
No, I'm just, so that's kind of, and I would think, just to give people a modern day example of this, you know, when the Lord ordained marriage, he said to be fruitful and multiply. So of course, that gives a lot of analogy to, we talked about, you know, the oxen plowing the ground for the production of the field, like those straight lines to make the planting the most productive it could be. So a modern example would be like, make sure your tractor has even spokes, like in the you know, the thing that goes round and round and round. Like, make sure they're all even and plowing.
The tread or something, or
exactly. The thing that digs into the, you know, they've got to be even. Yeah, the tiller has to be even. Like, all the little parts of it have to be even and doing the exact same, you know, making the same groove in the dirt, you know. So you want to make sure that you're doing that, like, that there's that even space. And I think the Lord is the even space. You know, so.
I was just going to, last thing I was going to say was that, you know, yoked together and yoked to the Lord, yoked to the Lord. That's not easy to say. And so it's triangular in a way, you know, it's as we're yoked to him and we're brought together.
Well, the word also says that a threefold cord is not easily broken. So if the marriage is in the right tier, the Lord is the first tier, and then the spouse is the second, but they're all connected. Yeah. So if we're all connected, if I'm connected to the Lord, if he's connected to the Lord, and we're all connected like a woven braid around each other, that is much harder to break than separate strands. So you can't be separate. You know, it has to be together. So.
Yeah. I think this was good.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
I think so.
You guys, we love you.
Yeah.
And we'll see you around.